Hi, everybody. Welcome to another issue of the Learning to Go podcast. I'm your host, Margie Meacham, and with me today is Britt Andreatta. Britt is the CEO of Seventh Mind, Inc., and you might also know her from lynda.com, where she pioneered the application of science to learning. So welcome, Britt. Now that you're the CEO of Seventh Mind, can you tell me what sets your company apart and what exactly you do there?
Thanks, Margie. Maybe I am the CEA too. I don't know. I'll have to figure out what that stands for.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an exciting extension of the work I've already been doing for 20 years because I've already been consulting for a while, and my thought leadership has always focused on the science of success because I really believe that our biology it trumps everything else. If we're not working with how our brains and bodies were built to work, things don't end well. So what I found in my work is that most of today's workplace problems really stem from trying to make humans work in ways we're not built to do. And it's something I've been writing and teaching about. And so the consulting's always been there, but recently several companies approached me and asked me to build learning solutions based on my research and also my unique approach to learning design, which is all about maximizing how people learn and change their behavior. So Seventh Mind is really my company that houses both my consulting practice and now my suite of learning solution products. And the first one is out now. It's based on my first book, my last book. It just came out, Wired to Resist. And it's a new model of leading change that I created called the Change Journey Model. And then, I'll be building new products in the future. So more things will be coming out later this year and into 2018.
Okay, fantastic. And at the end of this podcast, we're going to tell everyone how they can learn more about their products and get in touch with you. So we definitely want to make sure we share that. So let's jump into the upcoming ATD ICE conference. And you have a presentation there, as do I, which is kind of how we decided to get together and sort of co-promote what we're doing there and get to know each other a little bit. So your topic is the neuroscience of teams. What has your research uncovered about using brain science to enhance the performance of teams in the workplace?
Yeah, this has been so fascinating to explore this topic. The brain science and how we work with and in groups has been really amazing. And for the longest time, neuroscientists only focused on studying individuals, putting individuals on MRI machines and using EEGs on individuals. But now they can actually wire up several people and be studying what's happening into all of their brains simultaneously when they're engaging with each other and working together. So it's pretty new stuff, and it's pretty fun to be exploring it. There were three things that when I looked at all the research that stood out to me. And the first is how we develop our sense of belonging or inclusion in a group. We really, us humans have a strong biological need to be part of a community. It's part of our need to survive. And so portions of our brain are responsible for kind of scanning for social relationships and also assessing where we are in that group, like what's our status in that group. And then we also have parts of our brain that really process and deal with when we feel excluded or marginalized. So there's some really interesting research on that. The second area that really stood out to me was how we develop trust with others. And this is really a big part of what makes work teams so effective is when there's trust. And, even though we have the technology that allows us, like even right now, I have never met you face-to-face, although I'm looking forward to doing it in Atlanta at ATD. We're having this conversation, and yet we've never met. And so technology has allowed us to have relationships with people that we have never met or don't see on a regular basis. But the truth is that our brains were built for in-person interactions. And what it means is that our brains read meaning and intent in others through looking at micromuscular changes in the face. We pay attention to body language, and there's even pheromone signals that our brains pick up on. And much of that is lost when we are not in person, particularly when we go into, when we're online. And even if we're in a video conference, that flat 2D representation loses a lot of the micromuscular data that we can read in 3D space. So I think that's another area is that we're finding that it's harder for people to build trust. It takes longer through these dispersed relationships and technology-mediated contact that does them when we're in person. And then the third big area that stood out was how we collaborate. Collaboration is the currency of teams, and it's really a unique form of working because there's synergy amongst all those people, and they are influencing each other. And so how folks collaborate and how their brains kind of sync up with each other as they're doing a task or as they're solving a problem and as they're bringing new ideas to that group also really shows up in the brain science.
Britt, there's a couple of things I just want to piggyback on here because you've made some really important points. The first one is survival. And one of the things I like to tell people is you really can't understand anything about why we have the brain we do unless you understand that it is built to keep us alive. That is why it has evolved the way it is. And so everything about us at one time or another was important to our survival. Now, sometimes in today's modern world, it gets us into trouble because there are some things that our brains do that are not haven't caught up with our crazy world. And this is where some of your points about what we lose in that digital connection, that we're built for face-to-face connection. And so it's harder to develop it. But that survival imperative, that's underneath everything we do. And I think it's just so critical that people understand that, because we don't walk around normally, those of us fortunate enough to live in a relatively safe place and a safe environment, we don't walk around thinking about that. But our brain is doing that for us in the background.
Absolutely. I always talk about humans are wired to do three things. The first is survive, right? Live another day. The second thing is belong, find a meaningful community to be part of. And that's really tied to survival because we lasted longer when we were hunting and gathering with others and fighting saber-toothed tigers with others. And then when those two things are taken care of, we turn to our third need, which is to become, to grow into our best selves, to achieve and seek and learn. And what's so interesting is that our workplaces, what we want out of workers is the become stuff, but oftentimes we're messing with survival and belonging, and they can't show up as their best self if we're messing with that stuff. And that's a large part of what I talk about in my the book that just came out, Wired to Resist, is how change is really affecting those survival mechanisms in a way that makes people more and more resistant to change.
Yeah, that's why even a wonderful change like a new job, like a promotion, can trigger that stress response. Because, when we were fighting saber-toothed tigers, nearly every change was potentially lethal. Change was not a good thing. And so we're wired to be very mistrustful and very concerned about change. And it often is perceived as a threat for us. So
exactly.
Yeah. Now, one other thing that I want to kind of just underline that you said, and that was your third point about collaboration, because you used a term that is pretty common in just, social language, but I know you used it with scientific precision. And that was when you talked about people getting in sync with each other, because the research shows now that we can look at multiple brains working together that they actually start to operate on the same wavelength, that we are talking about a physical electrical phenomena that starts to happen. And I wondered if you wanted to elaborate that and just make sure that we call out to folks. This isn't just a metaphor for understanding each other. Our brains physically sync up in a very powerful way that we can measure with electric scientific instruments.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the studies that I was looking at, they were taking people through both an activity where they had to navigate something and work together, but then there was unexpected challenges that showed up. And they could see how each of the brains are responding in sync to the decision-making aspects of it and then the challenging aspects of it. And start to work on a, almost a subconscious or cellular level as a cohesive unit if it's going well, right? And some of the research talks about when organisms are healthy that you can see a fractal design, and that they could actually see fractal designs in teams working together in the brain in terms of the wavelengths and stuff that were happening. So there's some really fascinating things that we're seeing now that we're starting to look at groups of people. And researchers talk about two things. One is a sense of we, put in quotes, sense of we, like when does that happen as the group is working together? And then the second is what they call the rhythm of the team, which is when that team starts to really operate very effectively because they've gotten into alignment with each other, and a lot of that stuff can become second nature in terms of how they work together. And again, if you look at the modern workplace and how we oftentimes, are reorging departments and moving people around and really considering them these quote unquote human resources as opposed to our talent that is bringing their best selves to work, we can be constantly disrupting that sense of we and rhythm of team that's getting established to the point where that groups can't work effectively because they're not being supported in working effectively.
Okay, so that's something that we want to caution people that your research is showing, a practice we need to stop. So how about a few practical tips for increasing the effectiveness of all the teams in your organization?
Sure. I'll share some tips, but I want to give you a caveat first, which is I always premiere my latest research at ATD because I'm just too excited to wait to write the book. So I always give the talk first, and I give some tools and tips, but then I sit down and I write the book. And when I get into the book, a lot more gets developed, more tips and tools get added. So yes, I'll share some tips now, but get the book in a few months when it's out. It's going to be titled Wired to Connect, and it should be out by the end of the year.
Okay.
Probably four key takeaways based on what we know so far. One is really honoring those in-person connections, that when we can, putting people in the room together and having those in-person interactions are really vital for those initial trust-building periods of time with the team. And once that's in place, people can go digital and distance and be fine. But it's really important to kind of front load that if you can. And if you cannot, then you gotta amplify and double up on your the way you are building trust through more sharing and more contact time and more revealing of a relationship, since you're losing some of the biological ways we do it. A second thing is really looking at how you identify leaders that are going to help teams collaborate. Oftentimes what happens is we select team leaders because they were great individual contributors, they were awesome at performing, but the folks who bring out the best in the team are really great facilitators. And that transition from performer to facilitator is a big one, and not everyone can make it. And so I think it's important to look for who's already good at facilitating others and think about them as the ones that should get tapped for team leadership. And if you've got a performer, knowing that you're going to have to invest a little bit of training and coaching to help them make the shift. Because if they stay a performer while leading the team, they're ultimately going to undermine the ability of the team to be as productive as possible. Third big one is all the research on psychological safety. Dr. Amy Edmondson at Harvard is kind of the big thought leader on this, but all the brain science is really supporting her work that she discovered, which is, the key differentiator for thriving teams is that folks have this definition, and this is her definition, but what she saw in the data said, the team has a sense of confidence that the team will not embarrass, reject, punish someone for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. So it really becomes an environment where it's safe to be yourself, it's safe to question, it's safe to, be vulnerable. All of these things are in place. And what we know is that how we bring the team together either sets them up to start to build psychological safety, or we can build them up to start to have a climate of conflict and blame, where everyone's throwing each other under the bus and no one's taking responsibility, and the group is certainly not, working well as a unit. And then that leads me to the fourth one, which is, teams really have to be held accountable as a unit for the work that they're doing. And that's the successes and the failures, right? They're going to share in the credit, they're going to share in the failure too. And one of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of our performance, management systems, while we ask people to work in teams, we then assess them individually at the end of the year, and we give them individual bonuses. And what we're finding is that undermines a team. A team really has to be held accountable as a unit, because that's what gives them the strength and the motivation to work through the challenges when they arise and to solve those problems that are going to come up. if you don't hold them accountable as a unit, ultimately what happens is the team stays fractured, and it can generate learned helplessness over time, where people feel like, well, I shouldn't give any effort because it doesn't matter anyway. And learned helplessness can really become a systemic problem that can cripple an organization or a department for years. So those would be kind of 4 key takeaways. I'll get into the details at ATD around the brain science of each of those, but those would be 4 ones that I know, are really solid and people could think about implementing right away.
Oh, yeah, definitely. For excellent reasons, among, I'm sure, many more, for people to come to your session. So I highly recommend it, and you'll find me in the audience. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. I'm doing it on both Monday and Wednesday, so there'll be 2 opportunities. And I'm looking forward to connecting with my peers. I always love speaking at ATD, and it's really my tribe. I love working with other learning and talent professionals.
Yeah, this is where you and I get that belonging stimulation that our brains are looking for, and that survival safety feeling is at something like ATD, and many of the people listening. It's our tribe, folks, so come on out. So we certainly encourage you to do that. So before we leave, speaking of dangers, Britt, is there anything that we need to be aware of when we're embarking on a brain-based approach, maybe watch-outs or pitfalls?
Yeah, I would think that one pitfall is that we're still so on the very front edge of this. Scientists are uncovering things every day, but it literally every month is a new discovery. So we don't know what we don't know yet. It's still evolving. So I really consider, and I'm sure you do too, we're doing part 1, part 2 of the work, and there's going to be more parts coming as neuroscientists do more research and we discover things, and even medical instruments and research instruments get more finely tuned. So I think it's important to consider this a work in progress. And also, I think it's important too to make sure that you're pulling research. As I always do, I make sure I'm pulling research from really trusted sources. I look at the science. I make sure it's valid and reliable, and that it's held to the highest scientific standards, so that we're not accidentally replicating, opinion or something that's really not verified with good science. And I think the second pitfall, and I'm sure you do it. It's just so important that we make sure we're pulling it from the right sources. And I know that's something that you're really known for. I so appreciate your blog and the pieces that you create, because I know that they're really done with that attention to high standards as well.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you.
And
I think you wanted to tell us one other thing.
Yeah. One other thing that I think is a potential pitfall, and this is probably why people are starting to ask me to build learning solutions, is that it's not always easy to take that science. Like, you can hear the science and go, oh, okay, that makes sense. But it's not always easy to take that and then turn it into something you can roll out as a learning in your organization. So, understanding it on one level is not the same as taking others on that journey of insight and behavior change. So I'm really looking forward to writing this book and building its related learning solution, because I think there's so many things that we'll all be able to use in our organizations.
Okay. Yeah. And I just want to reiterate the importance of being grounded in science. Obviously, you and I have started this little mutual admiration society, and I certainly hope it continues, because I've been aware of your work for a while too, and really interested in continuing it. So let's kind of skip ahead. Now we've talked an awful lot about your current research, your books, but I know that you don't stand still. So what are you working on right now that has you most excited?
Ooh, this is a great question. Love this question. Well, obviously, I love what I do. I light up when I talk about it, and I'm certainly enjoying continuing the team stuff, but I'm working on a couple other projects that I love too. Right now, I'm working on a new model that integrates organizational growth with organizational consciousness and leadership development. So it feels like it's really going to be a seminal work for me that ties together so many of the important facets of how to design organizations that can thrive through every stage of growth, instead of hitting those roadblocks that often can really cause an organization to falter for a while. I'm also doing some exciting work on what it means to create a real culture of learning. And in fact, I'm doing a second presentation at ATD on that topic. It's going to happen on Wednesday. And I've got a new course for LinkedIn Learning/lynda.com on this topic, and it's coming out June 16th. So that's kind of fun. And then and also in that, I'm releasing kind of this new model I've created for how we really think of a holistic and very transformative culture of learning. And then finally, I love working with leaders on helping them bring out the best in themselves and their talent and their organizations. I love doing that work. So I'm really, pleased and fortunate to say that I get to work on some really cool projects with some big companies. I can't always share the details of it while it's in progress, but there'll be more coming on that and some things in 2018 that I'm going to be excited to share with folks.
Okay. So how could someone get in touch with you, Britt?
The two best ways are through my website, which is easy to remember. It's just my name, BrittAndreatta.com. And then I'm also on LinkedIn. If you go to my website, you'll see, ways to get a hold of me. I also list my upcoming webinars and speaking engagements. I've got 2 webinars coming up soon on May 31st and June 13th, and I'm also going to be speaking at SHRM in New Orleans in mid-June. And I also hope folks will consider following me on LinkedIn and Twitter, because that's where I regularly share my latest research and other resources I think are helpful. So I love getting new followers. I hope some of you will connect with me and follow me, and we can continue this awesome conversation.
All right. And I want to encourage our listeners here to keep an eye on our website at LearningToGo.info, because we'll be continuing to share news about Britt's books as they come out. And I hope we can have you back, Britt, as you continue to work on things. Let's make it a regular thing. When you've got something new and exciting, please come on back and share it with us.
I would love that, Margie. That would be fantastic.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody for joining us for another edition of the Learning to Go podcast. And my guest today, you've been listening to me, Margie Meacham, and Britt Andreatta. So thanks again, everybody. Until next time, please stay in touch and let's help somebody learn today. Thanks very much.